Hey, everyone, welcome to Radio 28. Today, we're going to talk about a very ancient Chinese form of magic. Zhuyouke. So, this ancient Chinese healing practice, Zhuyouke, it's pretty much disappeared today. But, we can still find records of it in old texts. Throughout Chinese medical history, you see this thread of Zhuyouke. It involved praying to deities, explaining the cause of illness. The concept of Zhuyouke is broad, including incantations, spells, talismans, and even things like suggestion, psychology, hypnosis, and music therapy. It was about healing without needles or medicine, and supposedly, the cure rate was close to 100%. Back in ancient times, people thought sickness was punishment from the gods or evil spirits. So, they'd pray for forgiveness or use rituals to drive away evil. This practice was actually included in official Chinese medicine during the Sui dynasty, from 581 to 618 AD. In the Tang and Sui dynasties, they even had a curse and incantation department in the medical system, dealing with exorcising evil spirits. Even though Zhuyouke was always part of ancient Chinese medicine, its methods were totally different from traditional diagnostic techniques like observing, listening, asking, and feeling the pulse. Plus, because of the imperial family's interest in witchcraft, it was hard for it to become popular with normal people. Let's start with a folktale to see the magic of Zhuyouke. So, the story goes, back in the late Ming dynasty, around the 1600s, there was this traveling doctor named Zhang. You know, the kind who went from village to village, doing shows and also treating people. Every time he came to this village, he'd stay at the same inn. Every morning, he'd burn incense and paper, kneel to heaven and earth, then go outside and set up his stall. He'd take a long bench and, while chanting some words, make it balance on just one leg, completely suspended in the air. Then, he'd let go, and the bench would just stay there, perfectly upright. Sometimes, he'd even put rocks on top, and it would still balance. Now, you might think, that's just street performance tricks, right? Understanding physics and balance, no big deal. But here's where things get really interesting. After he'd gathered a crowd with his chair trick, he'd pull out a yellow piece of paper covered in symbols from his medicine box. Then, he'd take a small cup of yellow wine, and while chanting, he'd stick the paper over the top of the cup. Then, he'd turn the cup upside down, and the paper wouldn't even get wet, it would just stick there, and the wine wouldn't spill. Of course, this all sounds like some simple tricks a modern magician could do. So, in this town, there was this silk shop owner, Mr. Zhao, and he had a, well, let's just say a not-so-bright son, about 7 or 8 years old. Because the family was super rich, the kid ate like a king, all day long. Then, out of nowhere, he just collapsed, and his stomach swelled up like a balloon. They saw tons of doctors, tried all sorts of medicine, but nothing worked. Now, it just so happened that Mr. Zhao was passing by the inn one day, and he saw this Dr. Zhang doing his balancing act. Figured, what the heck, might as well give it a shot. So, he brought his sick son to Dr. Zhang. Dr. Zhang checked the kid's eyes, looked him up and down, tapped on his bloated belly, then pulled out some yellow paper and scissors. He cut out a little paper doll, snipped a piece of hair from the kid's head, and then grabbed a silver needle. He then told Mr. Zhao to go get a chamber pot. Now, back then, those things were considered, you know, really gross. No way a rich guy would bring one out in public. Mr. Zhao, the owner of the silk shop, felt like he was being mocked. He was very angry, turned around, and pulled his son away. But then, Dr. Zhang began to mutter something, and then, with a quick move, he inserted the silver needle directly into the belly of the paper doll. As soon as the needle pierced the paper doll, Mr. Zhao's son, who hadn't walked far, suddenly screamed, clutching his stomach and crying out in pain. Then, with a poof sound, a stream of yellow liquid, like a waterfall, poured out of the boy's anus, soaking his entire backside and creating a puddle on the ground. It was incredibly smelly. The boy's swollen belly immediately deflated. The onlookers all held their noses, some laughing heartily, and others praising Dr. Zhang. So, today, Zhuyouke might seem like some kind of Eastern superstition, right? But, in Western psychology, it's actually been studied quite a bit. One of the most famous researchers was the psychology master, Carl Jung. Jung, he was a contemporary of Freud, a real giant in psychology. Jung believed that Zhuyouke was basically an ancient form of hypnosis, using hypnosis to treat illnesses, which is what we call psychotherapy today. This method of healing has been around forever. We've talked about Jung's explanations of psychology and dreams before, so if you missed it, make sure to go back and check it out. Also, Franz Mesmer, he was an Austrian doctor, and he's best known as, like, the grandfather of hypnotism. He believed that the air we breathe and our nervous systems absorb this kind of magnetic fluid. He was a doctor, so he was focused on how to effectively treat patients, and he thought that diseases happened because the magnetic flow in people's blood and nervous systems got blocked. So, in his view, to cure diseases, you had to adjust this magnetic flow in the body. At first, he used magnets, but later he used his hands, like waving them over the patient's body to remove those blockages. He believed that using his hands, and later his eyes, and increasing the number of waves, could remove the magnetic flow blockages in the areas he was waving over. This is where the term animal magnetism came from, and this whole procedure was called mesmerism. It's said that when he was treating people, he'd wear these black robes and say all these weird, nonsensical things. But, get this, a lot of patients actually got better. This was probably just psychological suggestion, you know, making them subconsciously boost their body's defenses. So, the earliest recorded document about Zhuyouke is the Huangdi Neijing, or Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon. It's a very early Chinese medical classic, generally believed to have been written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC. Zhuyouke was incorporated into official medicine. It was divided into 13 categories, which is why we also refer to it as Zhuyou 13 departments. These 13 departments included internal medicine, dealing with colds, coughs, and internal diseases. Wind diseases, treating numbness, paralysis, and strokes. Obstetrics and gynecology, handling prenatal, postnatal, and women's diseases. Ophthalmology, treating blindness and eye diseases. Pediatrics, dealing with childhood illnesses. Dentistry and throat diseases, treating toothaches and throat problems. Smallpox and skin diseases, including boils and infections. Trauma and orthopedics, treating fractures and injuries. Otolaryngology, treating ear and nose diseases. Surgical infections, treating skin conditions and tumors. Traumatic injury, treating injuries from weapons. Exorcism and incantations, dealing with evil spirits and poisons. Acupuncture, treating mental disorders. Later, in 1636, when the Manchus conquered China, Zhuyouke was abolished by the official government. So, this feng shui master, Wang Tingji, in his 1998 book, Tales of Strange Arts, he tells 2 stories about Zhuyouke that happened to people he knew. He got interested in Zhuyouke because of a neighbor, the Wu family. They were wealthy people. They had a daughter who was born with a hunchback, but she was actually cured by Zhuyouke. Later, their 15th son, he happened to be classmates with Wang Tingji, and they were close friends. From his descriptions, Wang Tingji learned all the details. He saw his sister being treated for her hunchback with his own eyes. The Zhuyouke doctor came, set up an altar, drew talismans, chanted spells, and then placed a large basin in the middle of the hall. You know, those zinc iron basins that people used to wash kids in. People over 40 years old must have seen them. Zhuyouke doctor put a frog in the basin, and told the family to add an inch of water. Then, he put a low stool next to the basin. After setting everything up, he burned a talisman in the basin and told them to bring the girl out and have her stand on the stool. He told the family that while he was chanting and burning talismans, they had to get the girl to jump into the basin by herself, no pushing. Now, the family saw he had a whole stack of talismans, and they were thinking, if it's just a jump, why does he need so many? But then, when the girl stood on the stool and looked into the basin, she just wouldn't jump. She was 7 or 8 years old, so that small height shouldn't have been scary at all. The whole family was encouraging her, but she just wouldn't budge. And the Zhuyouke doctor was burning through those talismans, and everyone was getting really anxious. He was chanting with his eyes half closed, sweating like crazy. Then, just like that, the Zhuyouke doctor yelled out. The hunchback girl suddenly turned pale, screamed, and then just fell into the basin. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, happy ending, right? The doctor then burned more talismans in the basin, chanting away, and after a while, he told the family to use that water to bathe the girl. But, because the girl's fate wasn't strong enough, she was told she could never eat frogs again. Yeah, you heard that right. Chinese people love to eat, pretty much anything is on the menu. Eating frogs is super common in farming areas of China. Strangely enough, after that jump, her spine started to straighten. The family was thrilled. But, they were rich, and they believed in eating seasonally. So, when frogs were plump and juicy, they naturally enjoyed frog dishes. Southern Chinese people especially love frog congee. Back then, there were no pesticides, so the frogs were extra delicious. They had a lot of kids, so they didn't really pay attention to the taboo. They'd eat frogs and rave about how good they were, and the girl just had to listen, drooling. She was still a kid, didn't know any better, and kept begging her mom to try some frog. After 2 years, frog season came around again, and the mother, being soft-hearted, gave her a tiny piece of frog leg to taste. Big mistake. The girl's back started curving again, worse than before. When they went back to find the Zhuyouke doctor, he refused to treat her. The person who witnessed this story is still alive in Macau today. Alright, so the second story is about a toothache. So, because Wang Tingji knew about the Wu family's daughter and her hunchback cure, he was really interested when he heard a friend who studied witchcraft had a secret Zhuyouke manual. He begged his friend to let him see it. His friend then asked him to meet at a tea house. The next day, Wang Tingji went, and sure enough, his friend had this red and black ink manuscript, full of talismans and spells, really ancient looking. Wang Tingji and his friend were chatting for a while, and they noticed a waitress was paying close attention to them. So, they started talking about random stuff. Wang Tingji then pretended to flip through the book, and the waitress finally couldn't resist. She came over and asked if they wanted any desserts. Wang Tingji, knowing why she came over, opened the book and said, I have a toothache, and this book has a secret cure for toothaches, so I'm looking at it. I can't eat sweets right now. The waitress saw some prescriptions in the book and just smiled and walked away. Wang Tingji actually had a bit of a toothache, so he asked his friend to try out his Zhuyouke. His friend prepared some cinnabar and yellow paper. Then, his friend found the talisman for toothaches in the manual, pretended to write it a few times in the air, and then chanted some words. After a moment, he dipped his brush in cinnabar and drew the talisman on the yellow paper in one go. He told Wang Tingji to burn the talisman, mix the ashes with well water, and drink it. And believe it or not, after drinking the talisman water, his toothache stopped. It didn't come back for 2 or 3 days. Today, we've mainly looked at Zhuyouke from a medical perspective. But the principles behind the talismans and spells are actually much broader. We've talked about this in our previous video on corpse control, where Zhuyouke plays a really important role. If you haven't seen that one, definitely go check it out. So, the magic of Zhuyouke, even today, only a few people are willing to believe it. Even though we can't understand it, it really does work. This world hides so many secrets. We believe in science for everything now, but we still know so little about ourselves. That's all for today's story. If you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. See you next time.